He just called me a few minutes ago to reassure that he is coming here tomorrow morning. The celebrations will close with a Thanksgiving service at the St. Peter's Catholic Church on Suka campus. It is my desire that we shall all participate in these activities which have been lined up to mark the coming of age of Nigeria's oldest university. Our Founders Day lecture is about the oldest and most prestigious of the public lectures organized by this university. The lecture serves to create a forum for frank discussions on issues of global and national relevance. Therefore, the honor of delivering the Founders Day lecture is reserved for men and women of uncommon accomplishments, especially those whose stories and achievements can truly inspire the university community and the youth of our dear country. Over the years, guest lecturers drawn from virtually all walks of life have taken advantage of this forum to proffer opinions and solutions on a range of topics ranging from environment through global economy, education, entrepreneurship to governance. In keeping with this tradition, as the 52nd Founders Day celebration approached, we went in search of a man of the moment, a newsmaker, and one whose personal achievements would also serve to inspire all of us. At a time like this, when the entire world is still smarting from an economic recession that led to the collapse of financial institutions across the globe, an economic recession which has continued to threaten otherwise strong economies in America and Europe, there is no better choice of a guest lecturer than the man who has been saddled with the enormous responsibility of managing the huge bad loan assets of Nigerian banks, measuring in trillions. In Mr. Mustafa Chikobi, the Managing Director of Assets Management Corporation of Nigeria, AMCON, we have a first-class mathematician with distinguished pedigree, whose story represents a classical example of brain gain. You know, we are used to brain drain, but this is the classical example of brain gain. He is a thoroughbred and a patriotic Nigerian who returned home after honing his skills in the diaspora. On his broad shoulders rests the huge responsibility of managing the bad loan assets of our banks, estimated at over 4 trillion naira. In this position, the impact of his decisions and actions on the overall state of our Nigerian economy will be far-reaching. Expectedly, his topic, sustainability as a key in life, business, and government, addresses an important issue in virtually all aspects of human existence and conduct. A lecture of this magnitude will not attract the significance it deserves without a chairman who is equally befitting in both authority and candor. In our chairman, His Excellency, Ambassador Chief Arthur Christopher Mbanefo, MFI 0N FCA, the Odu Osodu Nkatuku Mbanefo 3 of our nation. We have a corporate diplomat who was once Nigeria's ambassador, plenipotentiary, and permanent representative to the United Nations, an internationally acclaimed chartered accountant, who was once the president of the Institute of Chartered Accountants of Nigeria, and more importantly, a senior citizen of the Federal Republic of Nigeria. Our chairman has also been involved in the management of the petroleum resources of the country, as well as in the management of universities. He has been the pro-chancellor of 3 first-generation universities, namely University of Lagos, University of Bafemi Awolowo University, and Ahmadu Bello University, Zaria. I am tempted to add here that during the Civil War, Nigerian Civil War, our chairman also served as the Minister of Commerce and Industries of the defunct Republic of Biafra. His presence here today adds grace, clout, and diplomatic finesse to our celebrations. It is my expectation that the bringing together of these two compatriots who represent the best of Nigeria from different generations will serve as a good blend of the past, the present, and the future, which is essentially what our celebration today is all about. As a university with a rather unique history, we draw enormous goodwill and glory from our past, while our energies and intellect are spent on dealing with the present and strategizing for the future. As the current custodians of the vision that gave birth to this legacy institution, we are conscious that our responsibilities go beyond merely keeping the gates of the university open and admitting and graduating students as a routine. Instead, we have a duty to preserve the vision and to build on the achievements of our forebearers. This thinking has been at the center of the task of rebuilding the University of Nigeria, which my administration continues to pursue with relentless passion. As the oldest and one of the largest universities in this country, we are faced with the problem of dilapidated and inadequate infrastructure, which must be addressed urgently if the university must sustain its reputation of excellence. In addition, we must also stand up to the newer challenges brought about by globalization and advances in technology, and the resultant changes in pedagogy, research, and administration. Therefore, whatever status or reputation our university attains in the future will be determined to a great extent by how we deal with these challenges today. This explains why meeting these challenges has been the preoccupation of my administration and will continue to be the focus of this administration going forward. However, our ambition of being a 21st century learning environment, learning center, is being hindered by the inadequacy of resources to fund some of the requisite infrastructure upgrade. Therefore, at every forum like this, we take advantage of the presence of distinguished guests, of course, like our distinguished chairman and guest speaker. So far, the responses from government, from the private sector, and from individuals have been enormous. And it is our hope that many more stakeholders will lend their support in due course. Despite the challenges we face, these are interesting times at the University of Nigeria. Don't you agree? Our campuses are witnessing a major comprehensive rehabilitation. The first of 52 years ago. This has resulted in a significant improvement in the state of infrastructure, facilities, and the general environment. A long-term solution is also being found for the problem of training and retiring first and second generations of academic staff. The expected impact that our university is in safe, competent, and committed hands. As always, we are proud of our past. We are mindful of our present, and we are confident of the future. Once again, I welcome you all to the 52nd Founders Day celebration, and thank you for finding time to come and to listen. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Thank you. The chairman of today's occasion, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, let me invite the microphone the University of Rector, Dr. Edith Moss, to please read the citation of the guest lecturer.
This citation on our very distinguished Founders Day lecturer. Persons, both natural and juristic, remember with excitement their birthdays. It is therefore not surprising that this citadel of learning, primus inter pares in terms of qualitative higher education, the one and only University of Nigeria, traditionally observes its Founders Day. We take pride in our enviable history as the first indigenous university in Nigeria with a firm foundation led by eminent patriots, of which the foremost was Sikh of Africa, Owele Nnamdi Azikiwe. Thus, anyone chosen to deliver a lecture on this historic day that the university celebrates its birth and appreciates the sacrifices of its founding fathers must be a person with a towering profile and appealing personality. A very distinguished lecturer, Mr. Mustafa Chike Obi, fits perfectly into this description. 1955, to the legendary mathematician's family, where both parents were great mathematicians. His father, Professor Chike Obi, was acclaimed by the African Mathematics Union as the first sub-Saharan African to hold a doctorate in mathematics. By his father's exploits, a distinguished lecturer holds a first-class honors degree in mathematics from the University of Lagos. He furthered his education at Stanford University Graduate School of Business, where he obtained Masters in Business Administration MBA. And he is carving for himself a niche, both in private and public domain. Our distinguished lecturer had served as a vice president at Goldman Sachs office between 1984 and 1992, and has held senior positions in some other Wall Street firms. Permit me to just mention one, Stearns and Guggenheim Partners. Also, he was the founder and managing partner of Manson Park Advisors, a financial service advisory and consulting firm in New Jersey, USA. Mr. Chairman and distinguished audience, we know that good brains do not go unnoticed. Mr. Chikobi's intelligence and management prowess distinguished him and made a way for his recognition for obvious challenging tasks. It was therefore not surprising that following the enactment of the Asset Management Corporation of Nigeria Act in 2010, the search for a capable arrowhead to drive the rescue mission in the banking industry and restore confidence in the economy identified Mr. Mustafa Chike Obi. A managing director of AMCON, he is saddled with the responsibility of addressing the toxic assets crisis in Nigeria's banking industry with the aim of promoting a healthy financial industry, which is a sine qua non to national development and growth. Permit me to mention that AMCON, which is presided over by our distinguished lecturer, is a very large corporation to which about 30 to 40% of all big companies in Nigeria belong. And it has a balance sheet worth about 8 trillion naira. Amongst revered chairman, permit me to quote Harry S. Truman, who once opined that men make history and not the other way around. Progress occurs when courageous, skillful leaders seize the opportunity to change things for the better. Mr. Chikobi is a very courageous, strong-willed, and optimistic technocrat with determination to make history globally. I posit that only a personality seers with these characteristics can dare to undertake the mission of rescuing Nigeria's financial industry. In about 2 years, he has led AMCON to deliver on its mandate by buying non-performing loans from banks and repositioning the financial institutions for sustainable growth. Recently, he promised Nigerians, and I quote, that the era of bank failure is over. Life shrinks or expands in proportion to one's courage. And for Mr. Mustafa Chikobi, our distinguished lecturer, life grows larger and larger because his courage is very elastic. Our distinguished chairman, ladies and gentlemen, lions and lionesses, may I respectfully request you to join me with your generous applause as I invite to the podium for the Founders Day Lecture 2012 an astute technocrat, great mathematician, a renowned financial and investment advisor, a courageous and constructive transformational leader, one that I dare to call Mr. Fix-It, because he is a very clever mathematician. Those of you who were here the time we started, you understand what I mean. And by his name, and I believe by the things he is doing, a very detribalized Nigerian, Mr. Mustafa Chike Obi.
Vice Chancellor of the Great University of Nigeria, Nsukka. Members of the Council, I note some traditional leaders. members of the faculty, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, lions and lionesses. Before I begin this speech or lecture, I have several confessions to make. The first is that as the great orator was reading the citation, I found it difficult to believe she was talking about me. But I'll take her word for it and all of those things that she said. The second confession I have to make is that this is the first public speech that I have made that did not have to do with my area of expertise. I have confined myself to talking about AMCON specifically. And I have usually rejected any invitations to speak about anything else. But this was one invitation that I could not refuse. I'm extremely honored and humbled to be here before you. And so my second confession is that I'm quite nervous. This is my first paper, and I have all these eminent professors waiting to grade me. I hope I get a passing grade.
This lecture, that everybody gets a copy of it. We need to define what sustainability means. And of the many definitions of sustainability, the one that strikes me the most is the one that was attributed to the Brundtland Commission, which says that development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. That's sustainable development. The practice of sustainable development was introduced in the Nigerian extractive industries. And that's where it got into our lexicon, sustainable development. Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, we have to start with looking at sustainability in education. What that means is that there has to be a partnership between education and the outside world. So we make sure that when we educate people and we train them, that there's a ready demand for their skills and their learning. We must have a collaboration between industry, businesses, and the universities. It is in the interest of businesses and industries to support higher education centers because they provide the raw material that will keep them going. If you trace the development of the high-tech industry in the United States of America, it was centered in two areas, the Boston, Cambridge area and the Silicon Valley area. And if you observe that in those two areas, they had a very high cluster of high institutions of learning. In the Boston area, you had Harvard, you had MIT, you had Boston College, you had about 6 or 7 very good universities in a very small area. In the Silicon Valley area, you had Stanford, you had University of California, Berkeley, you had San Jose University, and you had Santa Clara University, all in the same area. And that's what provided impetus for students to want to go to university because they knew that as soon as they left the university, there would be ready demand for their skills. So one of the things that we have to do is we have to create a better marriage between our businesses and our companies and the universities. And that's something that AMCON will be trying to do in the future. Finding ways to support the faculties of businesses and finance and things that marry with what we're trying to do. Because we need young people and we need them well-trained so that we can continue and be sustainable in our business. Let me talk about what affects us most, our personal life. I find in my short stay here, you find people who live a certain life for many years and they get an appointment, usually an appointment in government of some sort. We know that the average life of government appointments is quite short, 5 to 10 years if you're in a senior position. But these people get these appointments and they change entirely how they live. They get as big a house as they can get away with. They get as many security detail as they can get away with. They get many, many cars that they barely use. And any casual observer knows that these people cannot sustain that lifestyle if they left government. Why embark on it? Knowing that the life expectancy of government service at those levels is quite short. Now that leads to many things. It leads to an unnecessary clinging to a job. People will do anything to keep that job. They abandon their principles. They abandon even their sense of pride, because they know deep down that the life they're living can only be sustained for the short time they're there in government. We see people who do a government contract and make a lot of money, and they change their lifestyle, and then they don't get a contract, maybe government changes, and then all of a sudden they're doing all sorts of crooked things because they need to maintain this artificial lifestyle. Nigeria is now Nigerians are the fourth largest spenders in the UK. We consume more champagne than, I think the exceptions may be France and United States of America. Now, I personally find that good palm wine, fresh from the source, tastes better than any champagne I've ever tasted. If we devoted the resources we spend on champagne to finding a way to truly preserve the fresh palm wine, and I know some of you professors will tell me it's very difficult to do, and all the attempts to bottle palm wine has left a less than perfect palm wine. But if we devoted the resources to something like that, we could be exporting bottled palm wine to France, because believe me, it tastes better and it has a higher kick than any champagne you can find. So let's all today agree that when we go to a function, and I've been to one, this is my first week back to Nigeria, I went to a function in Lagos, and there was champagne flowing. And of course I like champagne, so I was enjoying the champagne flow to the point where I wanted some water. I asked for some water. And they told me we're out of water, but you can have more champagne. This is actually a true story. I think that champagne was designed for toasts. When we were growing up, and I'm not quite as old as my father, Odu here, but champagnes were reserved for toast. You went, even in the rich countries like the US, you go to a function, even in the White House, they bring out a champagne for a toast. Here we overdo it. The more champagne we have, the happier we feel. I do not think that is sustainable. I don't think we as a country that doesn't have infrastructure, we don't have good rail system, we don't have good roads, we don't have good running water, I don't think that we should celebrate those champagne drinkers. And I've promised all my friends that after today's speech, I will not drink a drop of champagne in Nigeria until we have better roads, constant electricity, and I think if some of you join me, and these people buy their cartons of champagne at their parties, and we go there and we say, no, do you have palm wine? Or do you have Gouda or Star? I think they'll get the message that we are not impressed by how much money you spend buying champagne for your party. There are many other things that you will see in our lives that just don't make sense for a country that has needs We have needs I went around the university yesterday with the Vice Chancellor. If I was Bill Gates, I would probably have given him all my money. Because those are things that are sustainable. An auditorium for a university. A computer center that's modern for a university. The benefits of that are just absolutely tremendous. So in our personal lives, let's ask ourselves the questions. This thing I'm doing, can I sustain it if things change? I'll give one more personal example and then I'll jump to the next topic. People in government, and I don't want to pick names, fly first class when they get to certain levels of government. I was told I was allowed to fly first class as well. But I've refused to fly first class because I can't justify it. The cost of a ticket first class to London is about $11,000. The cost of a business class ticket is about $5,000. I cannot find any government official who can justify that difference in price. So I don't do it. I don't do it because it's nice. I've glanced at the first class cabins from time to time. They look very good. The chairs are nice. They become full beds and they give you massage and all that stuff. It's nice. But I can't justify it because if I left my office tomorrow, if I left AMCON tomorrow, I would not be able to afford it. So that's why I don't do it. So when they threaten me, tell me to do something that I don't believe in, I tell them, no, you can have your job. Because my life will not change if I gave up this job. So I'm free. I am free to do what I think is right. And any mistakes I make, and I make many, any mistakes I make are mistakes of judgment. There will never be mistakes because I'm compromised, because I have lost my sense of dignity. There will be mistakes of judgment, and I'm very, very willing to be corrected on mistakes of judgment. So I implore all of you, many of you are older and more experienced than I am, many of you are more accomplished than I am, but many of you are younger than I am. So I'm addressing the younger ones particularly. Please, in anything you do in your personal life, check a box. Can I sustain this thing I'm about to do? And if the answer is no, don't start it. Don't marry a man if your life together will not sustain your needs. Don't embark on any project if you cannot sustain it. There lies the way to ruin, unhappiness, and in many cases, a loss of yourself. So that's my advice to the younger ones on sustainability in their personal lives. I want to go to sustainability in business. And that's where AMCON comes in quite a bit. We have seen the biggest problem of Nigerian industries is that they do things that, unless everything goes well, they're bound to fail at some point in time. I can give you many examples. The typical Nigerian businessman starts a business and is successful initially because Nigerians are hardworking and smart. They usually start and they're successful initially. And then they start creating a lifestyle that the business sustains the lifestyle. They buy bigger cars, they buy bigger houses, they retain no money in the company. And then something happens, oil prices drop. There's a credit crunch. There's a currency devaluation for some reason or the other. And these businesses cannot. They have no retained earnings to support themselves. So in all these cases that we've seen, something bad happened and all these companies can no longer pay their debts. I think when the when I was being introduced, it was mentioned that AMCON is involved with 30 to 40% of Nigerian businesses. I think that's a low number. I think that practically every large business in Nigeria has some relationship with AMCON. And the challenge for AMCON is not to foreclose or recover the money. The challenge is to recover the money that's owed while preserving the companies so that jobs can be preserved for the young Nigerians. So when we save a company like ARIC, for example, and I will say this, there are 3 airlines. There's a 4th one that's smaller. But there's 3 airlines, major airlines, that are flying in Nigeria today. They are all flying today because AMCON intervened. If AMCON had not intervened, the 3 large airlines today would have gone the way of Air Nigeria. But the point is, these airlines were owned by individuals. There is no place in the world where an individual can own an airline. Usually the Nigerians are reluctant to go out there and say, I want to sell some shares of my company. And the large reason for this, is because they want to be able to control what happens in the company. They want to use that company to sustain a lifestyle that's unsustainable. So they will refuse to sell shares, and they get into all these difficulties. I think we need to learn that good things don't last forever. I think the Bible says 7 good years and 7 lean years in some places. I think we should all learn to plan in our businesses what will happen during the lean years. And I think that that's been the failure of our businesses. And if you are offered a job, again, I'm talking to the young ones, please do some research on the ownership of the company. If the company is a one-man show, and that one man lives a flamboyant lifestyle, you can be sure that that company will run into trouble at some point in time. And tread gently as you accept a job from such companies. Finally, our system of government. This is always a difficult one for me. We have a system of government that we copied largely from the United States of America, and they've practiced it for over 100 years. So it'd be a good thing for us to learn something from them. If we're going to copy their system, we should learn something from them. And the most important thing that I learned in my years in the U.S. watching their government was that the National Assembly and the federal executive were kind of siblings who would quarrel from time to time. Who the older sibling is, the younger sibling is, doesn't really matter. But they were siblings. But the judiciary was the parent. The judiciary is where you went to settle the difference between siblings. And it is always amazing to me the reluctance we have to use the judiciary for that role. Instead of squabbling about should we impeach him, should we not impeach him, can we invite the president or can we not invite the president, it'd be nice to go to the judiciary and ask them to interpret the law. It is amazing to me when I see lawmakers interpreting the laws they made. It's just mind-boggling that they interpret the laws they made. They make the law. If there's a difference in interpretation between them and their younger or older brother, we should go to Dad and say, Dad, what's the real answer? Knowing that they have the power to then change the law. They can, if the interpretation is not what they like, they can go and write the law again. So this squabbling that we have between the siblings, as I call them, is unsustainable. We have to stop this squabbling. Everything that emanates from one sibling doesn't work for the other sibling. And we've seen this. We've had brothers and sisters that they fight all the time. Some of us have kids and they fight all the time. So I think that, and here I will fault some of our academicians. They should speak up and say, if you make the law, you don't interpret it. Let somebody else do it without acrimony. They can say, we don't agree on this, let's go ask the Supreme Court. But that is seen as contentious. So I think that we in government should work better together. We should think of the institutions we build. We should think of the future. We should have our priorities correct. We should fund our education. We should fund our infrastructure. We should do many things that is easy for both parties to agree to do. And the way we're going, the way we're spending money in recurrent expenditure, the way we're squabbling about everything that comes up, I don't see it as sustainable. And the answer to that is that all of you must speak up. All of you must encourage better people to get into these positions so we can all work together. The expenditure in our government is clearly unsustainable. We are again betting on oil prices remaining high and reserves remaining high, and there be no disruption in production of our oil facilities. We had a scare this year, I don't know, many of you are not aware of it, where oil prices looked they were going to head to below 70. Luckily, that turned around. We have a situation in Europe that is very, very, very dangerous. If the Eurozone doesn't hold together, believe me, we're going to have problems here. I made a joke to somebody the other day that if you study the history of Europe, every 20 years they had a war. When this economic crisis occurred, somebody went to war. All the wars in Europe from 18th century was all because there was an economic crisis somewhere and those people go to war. And as many of you know, war is the best economic stimulus you can have in any economy. So they all went to war. But now they can't go to war. War is now something that is not an option for many people. And people have to discuss these things. People have to find new ways to solve economic crisis. And they come every 20 years. We escaped this one in Nigeria for a number of reasons. People complain about how the economy is not very good. The opposition will tell you that this is a growth without jobs. But the truth is that we have escaped this economic crisis, and we may not escape the next one. So let's think of things we can do together that will stop us from having a lot of pain when the next crisis comes, because it will come. In conclusion, I urge everybody who cares about Nigeria and who cares about what they do to please, in everything you say or do, think about the future. Think about what's going to happen in the next 20 to 50 years. I will conclude by telling a story about my early years at Goldman Sachs. I was made in charge of recruiting in a certain area, the fixed income area at Goldman Sachs. And when anybody got to the final stage and was hired, I told them to write down their expectations of income for the next year, the next 3 years, the next 5 years, and the next 10 years. And I kept it in my office. And almost without exception, 3 years later, somebody comes into my office and says, I didn't get paid enough. I did not get paid enough. And I'll go into my drawer and I'll pull out his numbers. And in every case, they were making multiples more than they had written, that they expected to make at that point. And yet, they were miserable. Because they don't think about the future. They think about the present all the time. So, we must keep our eye on the past. We must stand in the present, but we must always plan for the future. And when we plan for the future, let's make it things that we can sustain for the next 50 years. I hope when I'm 82, in about 25 years' time, I may be reinvited here to speak to a new group of people